You're probably aware that cinema cameras and cinema lenses are generally a bit more expensive than photography or hybrid style cameras and lenses. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but generally cinema gear is going to be a bit more expensive. But why? Now, I don't even have any particularly expensive cinema gear, but even what I do have, there is a clear difference in build quality and materials used. Let's start with lenses. This is the Nisi Athena 40mm T1.9, and this is the Sigma 24-70 f2.8. As you can see, they're quite different in size, yet this one is actually heavier by about 10 grams. And then this Blazer Remus 33mm anamorphic lens is another about 170 grams more than the Nisi Athena. And one of the biggest reasons that cinema lenses are often heavier than their photo counterparts is the materials that they used. Cinema lenses are almost always built out of metal, especially like good quality ones, not super budget ones, but good quality cinema lenses will be built out of metal, so they're just metal and glass. So they're going to be much more solid, more dense, and just heavier overall. Now, the amount and the quality of the glass inside the lens will also probably play a large factor in that, especially for anamorphic lenses like this one. This one isn't a whole lot heavier than these ones, but it's anamorphic, so it has more stuff going on the inside. And when it comes to even more expensive cinema lenses like the RE Signature Primes, for example, they're not only very, very well built and kind of big, honestly, especially compared to stuff like this. They also have a lot more glass on the inside to correct for things like focus breathing. They actually have an extra set of elements that basically counteract focus breathing by moving the opposite direction. So they just need to be bigger and heavier to fix that sort of stuff, or fix that sort of stuff. And this is an in the lens sort of thing rather than, you know, a camera compensation sort of thing where it just crops in. It's actually correcting for that focus breathing in the lens itself. Lens design is all about compromise. If you want the best lens possible, it's going to be massive. So if you're trying to make it smaller or cheaper, there's going to be compromises that will give more budget lenses some characteristics that those super high-end lenses maybe don't have. Chromatic aberration, focus breathing, distortion, stuff like that. As for cameras, there's a little bit more to it, but a lot of the same things still apply. Cinema cameras are often made entirely out of metal rather than plastic or a combination of the two that hybrid or photo style cameras will be made of, at least the body on the outside. Even though the FX30 isn't really a cinema camera in my opinion, Sony calls it one, and it is quite different to the Alpha series of cameras that Sony has, mainly in its body design. And I've talked about this at length in previous videos about the FX30, so go check them out if you're interested. I'm not going to reiterate it all here. And the same goes for the FX3 because they are basically the same body. The body itself is a lot more solid than a mirrorless camera like the A7 IV that I'm shooting on now, and you could even compare the FX30 to the A6700, which is the sort of the hybrid version of the FX30, because they have the same sensor and very similar internals. The A6700 is just a bit newer, so it has the AI chip. This one doesn't. And then the same would go for the FX3 and the A7S III. Internally, basically the same camera, but the body is how they differ. And I think maybe even a better comparison is the Blackmagic full frame 6K, which they call cinema camera. It's the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K. But that camera and the Pixus are basically the same on the inside, but their bodies are different in their shape and build quality. But with cameras, it goes even deeper than that because most cinema cameras will have a lot of features and physical features that hybrid and photo cameras won't have. For example, mounting points. Even a small cinema camera like the FX30 has 5 extra Q20 mounting points compared to the one that's going to be on any hybrid mirrorless camera. And most box cameras like the Pixus or like the FX6 or the C80 even. C80? Does the C80 have that many mounting points on it? And even more so for box cameras like the Pixus or like a Red Komodo X or an FX6 from Sony, they all have a bunch more mounting points because those cameras are designed to be rigged up, accessories mounted to them for productions. Another feature that cinema cameras usually have is a much better cooling system, and that'll usually be in the form of an internal fan. The FX3 and the FX30 have this right here, and any box camera will as well. And the reason that you want a better cooling system for video cameras in particular is because shooting video, especially for long periods of time and, you know, out in the heat and stuff, that's pretty obvious. Processing large amounts of data in a small body like this will generate a lot of heat. So cameras that are designed to do that will have a cooling system that can handle it. So it'd be pretty rare for a cinema camera, even something like the FX30, to overheat, whereas hybrid, mirrorless, or photo style cameras can be prone to overheating if you're using them for long periods of time. And that's why back in the day, and maybe even still now, some cameras have like a 30-minute record limit because they just wouldn't be able to handle any more than that. And this just means that cinema cameras are going to be more reliable when you're shooting video because they're not going to have that overheating issue. And if you saw my last video, you'll know what I'm talking about because I had some issues with the A7 IV regarding that. And lastly, cinema cameras usually have a lot more in the ways of inputs and outputs. Now, I think the FX3 and the FX30 is a bit of an outlier because they have almost the same as any other mirrorless camera, or at least Sony ones, except they do have the top handle, so you get more audio inputs. And the reason that cinema cameras have this extra I/O is because you'll usually have to plug in a bunch of stuff like monitoring and transmission systems, audio, and power. Again, the FX30 is not the best example of this, but you know, it does have more audio inputs with the top handle. You can power it via USB-C, but you know, a lot of cinema cameras, again, like the Pixis, like a Red Komodo X, they're gonna have like a dedicated DC input because a lot of the time you'd use something like a V-mount or gold mount or B-mount battery rather than an internal battery on the camera, or maybe as well as. And again, that just means that in production scenarios, they'll be easier to use because that's what they're designed for. Okay, so why does it matter? I think the biggest reasons to use cinema gear over photo or hybrid gear is the reliability and the specificity. If you're shooting video, you're gonna wanna use gear that prioritize video. Cinema cameras are generally gonna be more easy to use and reliable in production environments because that's what they're designed for. And when it comes to lenses, again, they're designed to be used in a production environment. That's why they have the focus and the iris gears on them, or zoom gears if you have a zoom lens, and they're all manual focus. But that also leads me to the downsides to cinema stuff over hybrid stuff. Apart from just being more expensive, there is a few other things to consider when using cinema lenses and cinema cameras. Because they are built to be much more solid, this is a heavy lens for the size, they're gonna be heavier and a lot of times bigger, like the ARRI Signature Primes that I mentioned before. So if you want a really small, lightweight setup, maybe heavy cinema gear isn't really what you want. And as for focusing, like I mentioned, a lot of cinema lenses are manual focus and a lot of cinema cameras don't even have autofocus. Some jobs, especially solo videography type jobs, manual focus just isn't as feasible or even necessary. So I think the message here is use the gear that makes sense for the jobs that you're doing. And I feel like that's pretty straightforward and people should already know that, but you know, we all buy into hype and we want stuff that we don't necessarily need. If you need cinema gear, then use cinema gear if you can afford it. If you need autofocus or a lightweight rig, or you're switching back and forth between photo and video, maybe hybrid gear is more what you need. Let me know what you think in the comments about deciding to buy or use different types of gear for different jobs. While you're down there, do all the other things. Go watch my last video about the A7 IV freaking out during a short film, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye.